If it seems like electricity prices are up, it's because they are. Utilities are asking regulators all across the country for higher rates. There's a lot of reasons for that. Demand is up for electricity. That's partially because of artificial intelligence data centers. It's partially because it's been a little bit hot this year. And it's partially because we're just using more electricity for more and more things. But there's also a supply component of this story. Power plants need to provide electricity to the grid, and it needs to do that on a second-to-second basis. So there's both supply and demand as part of this story, and they're working together to actually push prices higher, something that we really haven't seen in a significant way in about 20 years. So I want to dig through exactly what we know and where there may actually be some investing opportunities today. My name is Travis Hoyam. Thanks for watching Asymmetric Investing. Please subscribe here on YouTube for all my content. And if you want more from me, check out my newsletter, Asymmetric Investing. There's a link on the screen and a link in the show notes. Now I'm going to jump right in here with some official data from the EIA, the Energy Information Administration. So this is just going to give us exactly what's going on in the electric industry. So let's start with the average price of electricity. Is it the case that prices are going up? Since 21, the price of electricity for residential users has gone from 13.66 cents per kilowatt hour all the way up in 2024 to 16.48. Actually, if we look at the monthly numbers, these things get a little bit more choppy here, but we're actually up to almost 17.5 cents per kilowatt hour now. So if you look at the prices, these were pretty stable between 2008, 2009, 12 cents per kilowatt hour, all the way up to 12, 13 cents per kilowatt hour in 2019. Things really started to pick up in 2021. No coincidence, that is when interest rates started to go up. It was end of 2021 and into 2022. So that's going to be part of it. But there's also a demand side of it. And this is the thing that is not getting a lot of attention. It's really easy to blame AI data centers. It's easy to blame shutting down coal plants or all kinds of stuff. But the reality is that demand essentially went nowhere for more than a decade, for almost 20 years. So let's look at this on a quarterly basis. And you can see these little spikes here. The unique thing about the electric grid is the grid has to be built for the highest point of demand. So if you think about how much electricity do you use in September, a month like we're in right now, versus how much electricity you're using in July, in the heat of the summer. Well, in the middle of July, there's going to be a peak of demand between about 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock p.m. That's when people will get home, they turn on their air conditioning, they turn on the oven, turn on all their lights. That's when there's a ton of demand surging through the electric grid. The grid has to be built for that moment. It isn't built for the average demand that we have throughout the year. It's built for the moments of peak demand. I'll get to some of those capacity numbers in just a second. But that's the important thing to think about here when you're looking at these little spikes here, is the spikes matter. So let's go back to the monthly numbers, because this is where the spikes are going to be a little bit unique. If we go to 2007, I think this is kind of a local peak here, 373,000 million kilowatt hours. Then if we go all the way over to 2018, not a big increase, 381,000 million kilowatt hours. 2022, things start to pick up a little bit, 389. 2023, 392. 2024, we get to almost 400,000 million kilowatt hours of demand. The point here is the amount of demand for electricity did not really go up much for over a decade. But now what we're seeing is there's starting to be a little bit of an uptick over the past couple of years. That looks like it continued in 2025. So what are the reasons for that? Well, you had more efficient light bulbs, you had more efficient air conditioners. All of that was starting to be installed mid-2000s and then into the 2010s. So really over the last 15 or 20 years, the story of the electric grid was stable demand because the usage of electricity, the things that we were actually using electricity for, were getting more efficient year by year. There's limits to that though. In our house, we have efficient light bulbs. I'm not replacing old light bulbs with new, more efficient light bulbs anymore. I'm long past those years. So our electricity demand is going to be going up, if anything, as we have more kids in the house. Maybe we add an electric vehicle. We're adding more electronic devices. All of those things are overall going to increase demand, and they're not going to be offset by efficiency in other areas like we've seen over the past 15 or 20 years. That's not getting a lot of attention, but that's the reality, is that demand for electricity was not going up for quite a while. So it allowed the grid to basically operate as it was. So that's the demand side. The demand is changing, is stepping up over the past few years, something that we have not seen since kind of the mid-2000s. Here's another thing I want to start with on the supply side of things. And I'll get to some of the details of what's happened in more recent years in just a second, but you can see that since basically 2007, 2008, the big change in the supply for electricity is that coal plants are being shut down at a rapid rate. This is not because they're just willy-nilly shutting down coal plants. This is because coal plants are very, very old. We have not been building coal plants for decades. They're not economical to build new ones or even to upgrade old ones. So they're just simply being shut down, but those need to be replaced by something. So this is the supply side of the market. What are those coal plants being replaced with, and how are we meeting the new growth in demand? Well, you can see that in the 2000s, they were primarily being replaced with natural gas plants. Now, over the past 15 years or so, most of the new generation in the US is from wind, solar, and then battery storage is this kind of medium blue color here. So this status quo between 2007, 2008, and 2021 was fine, not adding a whole lot of electricity. The amount of battery storage, wind, and solar was increasing as a percentage of the new generation that was coming online. But now as you add more and more demands from the electrical grid, you're going to maybe have to build maybe more solar, maybe way more battery storage, maybe more wind, maybe even more natural gas. So what's happened in the past year? Well, the policy changes in the US have made it more costly to build wind, solar, and battery storage. So the subsidies that were driving that industry and a lot of the growth over the past 10 years or so, those subsidies are starting to go away. Those incentives to add wind, solar, and battery storage to the grid are starting to go away. What's the problem with that? When you have new demand on the grid and it needs to be filled next month, next year, how are you going to meet that demand? It takes a long time to build a natural gas plant. It doesn't take as long as building a nuclear power plant, but it still takes time to build it. It is much faster to put up solar panels or put up wind turbines or put up battery storage to play arbitrage with the energy that you have. So the flexibility of the grid starts to go down when the economics of these more renewable energies and these more deployable sources of energy start to be less economical. Just something to think about. So you add all of this together, the change in demand, the increase in demand. I'm not talking about a huge increase in demand, but even a small marginal increase in demand is going to mean that the grid is going to need to have more capacity. So that's going to be notable. Then the fact that that's not corresponding with an increase in supply, that's where you get the increase in prices, because this is a market where supply needs to meet demand. So what are utilities doing? They're saying, you know what? We have higher costs because we have more demand for electricity. We either need to build more power plants ourselves, or we need to buy more power from independent power producers. So we need more money to do that. This is from Power Lines in 2025. This is from July 2025. Utilities had already asked for $29 billion in rate increases in the first half of 2025. So at the end of the day, that's going to be what the customer is actually going to pay. There's all this supply dynamics that goes on in the background. I'll get to a little bit of that in a second. But the utility you're actually paying needs to get those rates approved by regulators. They are a regulated utility. Regulators can say, you know what, you can't increase your prices. So what is that going to cost? What is that going to mean for the availability of supply? Okay, you can increase your prices. What does that mean you're going to bring to the market? What are you going to build? What are you going to spend on transmission or distribution? There's a negotiation that happens between the regulator and the actual utility, but utilities are clearly basically across the board saying, you know what, we need more money to be able to invest in particular distribution and transmission of electricity, because a lot of the power plants are actually going to be owned by independent power producers. The other piece that we're going to see is the capacity side of things. So the US grid is split up into multiple pieces. So what happens in New York doesn't really affect what happens in California, but there's regions of states that are basically correlated. So PJM actually serves the most customers in the US. They're sort of a good proxy because they also have some interesting market dynamics. So they have auctions for capacity. So there's many different capacity auctions, and the details behind those matter. I'm not going to dig into that today, but what I do want to highlight is one of the recent auctions actually showed a 10x increase in the price that power producers were charging for capacity. So what does this tell you? This tells you that there's not just excess power plants sitting around. If you have a power plant that doesn't have demand today, maybe it's an older power plant, it's been replaced, it's less cost effective than some of the newer power plants or solar or wind, something like that that's been built in the last 5 or 10 years, but this asset still exists. There is a price that you would produce power and supply it to the grid. So you would say, okay, I'll provide capacity to the grid for this price, for $30 per megawatt day. But then let's say demand from the grid overall goes up. So you decide, you know what, I'm going to sell into the spot market. Or maybe I'm going to make a deal with an AI data center. They want dedicated power from this power plant. So I'm going to take that offline now. So now there's fewer power plants to supply power in these auctions. So now those prices go up. And again, this is supply and demand meeting each other. Demand's going up a little bit, supply not going up to meet it. Maybe it's even coming down depending on the region. That's where you see the 10x increase in the price per day. And this is just the price per megawatt per day that they're charging just to be available for capacity. So all of these factors are working together to drive electricity prices higher. Yes, it's partially because AI data centers are sucking up more and more electricity, but they're not necessarily going into the grid and just buying the electricity that you could buy, but they are making deals with those power plants that could be supplying electricity to the normal grid, like these PJM auctions. So that's taking some of that supply out of the market and is driving up costs for everybody else. There's also an increase in demand because we're not being more efficient today the way that we've been over the past 10 or 15 years. Devices are just not getting more efficient. We're having more and more devices in homes. AC is on a little bit more. That is driving up demand, not a huge increase in demand, but remember that even marginal demand increases is going to increase prices likely more than the increase in demand. So all of these things are working together to drive electricity prices. It's something that we see as consumers. Those prices are going up. Your electricity bills are likely increasing depending on where you're living, but this also presents opportunities for investors. So a couple of stocks to keep in mind. The first one is Brookfield Renewable Partners. So they're going to own primarily renewable energy assets, solar, wind, and battery storage. If there is an increase in demand for electricity, those assets are already in the ground. They're going to sign long-term contracts. And the good thing for as far as increased prices go is that there's going to be more demand for these power plants. They're maybe going to be able to sell some of it to these AI data centers on long-term power purchase agreements, but also the assets that are coming off contract should be more valuable in the future. So if you signed a 10-year deal to build a wind turbine, and now that contract is ending, let's say in 2025, what you could sell that power for last year is lower than what you can sell it for now. So those assets should be more valuable in the future. That's one way to play this market. NextEra Energy is one of the biggest utilities, regulated utilities in the US, also has a huge unregulated arm. So this is going to be a broad play on just utilities overall. And there's a number of different companies like this, Duke Energy, Xcel Energy, that would kind of fall in that same boat. Things you're going to want to look at here. What are you paying from a price to earnings standpoint, and what's the dividend yield? So this is one option. The other two that I just mentioned, similar dividend yield, 3.5%, similar PE ratio at about 20. And then Xcel Energy, also similar 3.2% dividend yield. That's going to just grow steadily over time. So these are not going to be super exciting stocks to own, but if you're looking for exposure to the electricity industry, to the increased prices that we're likely going to see across the board, not just this year, but in the future as well, these would be 4 stocks that I would be looking at. And I think a basket's probably the best way to play this industry as well. But hopefully that's helpful in understanding what's going on under the hood in the electric industry. This is not just one thing that's driving electricity prices higher. It's many things on both the supply side and the demand side that are converging to drive those prices higher, something that's probably not going to be reversed, something we're going to see likely in the future. Wouldn't be surprised if it becomes a big battle too, because the AI data centers are going to be something to think about if they're pulling demand or pulling supply from the normal electric grid. But let me know if you have thoughts in the comments section below. If you want more market analysis from me, including my market beating asymmetric portfolio, check out my Asymmetric Investing newsletter. Love to have you as part of that community. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you here next time.